Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth, the events coordinator for Gibson's Bookstore. I will say hello to our event attendees. While you are here, make sure you take a click around to find the web chat bar sidebar so that you can ask questions during the event. You can ask your questions at any time, and when we're ready to start answering questions, we'll start pulling from there. There's also a Q&A function for answering and asking questions. But we are joined this evening by Matt Hongoltz-Hetling, the author of A Libertarian Walks Into a Bear, the Utopian Plot to Liberate an American Town and Some Bears. And he is joined in conversation by his friend and fellow journalist and fellow author, Gloria Dickie, whose forthcoming book examines human relationships with the 8 bear species of the world. Thank you for joining us tonight, folks.
Thank you for hosting.
Yeah, thanks for organizing.
Cool. So I'm going to introduce Matt, and then we'll segue into some questions about his debut book. So Matt is as Elizabeth said, is a journalist. He's also a George Polk Award winner and a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. I first met Matt when I think we were talking about lobsters in Maine. So we've kind of come a far way when we discovered our mutual interests and bear authorship at that time. So Matt, your book just came out. So for those, I got my own copy here that he was kind enough to send me in advance. But for those who haven't yet got their hands on a copy, could you give us a brief overview about what exactly A Libertarian Walks Into a Bear is about?
Yes, before I jump in talking about the book, I just want to let folks know that a little later on in the show, we're going to be announcing the winner of a song contest that I organized called A Musician Walks Into a Bear, where the world famous drummer Glenn Cochee of Wilco will be identifying who won that contest. So my book, A Libertarian Walks Into a Bear, it's about a social experiment in which the national libertarian community decided that they wanted to kind of concentrate their voting power and create a utopian community that had no rules and no taxes. And rather than founding their own community, which they would have to build from scratch, they decided to take over an existing community. And they chose Grafton, New Hampshire, which is a small woodsy town close to the Connecticut River, and kind of came in and achieved some of those goals and their efforts to build a utopia. And not very long after that, the town started having bear problems. And so my book is about how those two things are connected.
And so this book, if I remember correctly, it actually grew out of a magazine article that you wrote, right, for Atavist magazine. And so I'm just curious, at what point did you think I actually maybe have a book here as opposed to just this long form feature? Why did you think that this Grafton warranted so much attention?
Well, anyone who has heard me talk about my writing process knows that I always write long. The Atavist magazine article, I think, turned out to be about 6,000 words on publication, but my first draft of it was about 32 or 33,000 words. And in the course of researching that article, I just kind of came upon absurdity upon absurdity, colorful story upon colorful story, and it was very clear to me that when I got the opportunity to write a book, that this was far and away the best candidate that I could hope to come up with.
Okay. And so you mentioned, I think, briefly in the opening of the book how you first kind of heard about Grafton, but could you walk people through that experience? Was it the bears that brought you to Grafton, or was it the Freetown Project, or was it something else? Like, how on earth did you find this place?
It was actually something else entirely. I was working as a reporter for the regional daily newspaper, the Valley News, and they had sent me to Grafton to talk with a veteran named Jessica Soul, who was disabled and was having a hard time utilizing the VA's services to get her home equipped for her disabilities. Her home was like unlivable. And while I was there, I started like chit-chatting with her about her cats. She had a bunch of cats, and I like cats, so it was kind of like a good icebreaker. And she says like, oh yeah, I used to let them outdoors, but that was before the bears came. I was like, oh, well, who cares about the VA? what do you mean by that? That the bears came. And then she kind of started talking about her experiences with bears in this community, which I could not believe. And I was so intrigued that I decided to kind of start digging around town and asking other people about the unusual bear behavior that she had reported. That kind of like started the process.
Okay, and so did that happen like quite quickly from when you were first just chatting with her about veteran affairs to like into like the Bearapalooza, or was it like something that came back to you like years later? It sounds like it was right away.
It was pretty close. Like I started researching more about the bears almost immediately. Yeah. And then when the activists expressed interest in the topic, then I knew that like, this could be really solid. And so that's when I really started devoting myself to it. So it was all pretty continuous, yeah.
Okay. And it seems like you spent a lot of time in Grafton, that people really got to know you and both trust and distrust you and your presence there. How much time did you actually spend like embedded in this kind of oddball community?
Yeah, before the article was published, I spent months and months going down there, sometimes once a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. And while I was there, sometimes I would be meeting someone that I had kind of arranged an appointment with, but oftentimes I would just be kind of like going door to door, knocking on, cold knocking on doors, or, going to the local hangouts and stuff and asking people for their bear stories. And so that process went on for months. And then when the book deal came, then I kind of like revisited Grafton and spent a couple months more kind of going through a similar process, but also spending a lot of time in the library.
Okay. And was that at kind of like the heyday of the Freetown project at that point, or was that kind of, on the downslope? Or could you talk to us a little bit more about this story and why they went to Grafton?
Yeah, it was so kind of crazy how this Freetown project unfolded over time. Like, they came in with a lot of very aggressive ideas about what they wanted. Like some of the extremists who actually kind of like fell by the wayside fairly early, but they were even pushing for like formal recognition that consensual cannibalism should be legal. And, organized bum fights should be legal, or, all this kind of nutty stuff. So it had like a very extreme tone to it right from the get-go. And that really turned off a lot of the established locals. So like right away there was kind of conflict and fireworks. If you can think of how you would feel if a bunch of outsiders were going to come to your town and turn it into their idea of utopia, you probably would look at that effort pretty critically. And the townspeople of Grafton were no different. And despite that, the libertarians found willing allies within the town on some of the more mainstream libertarian ideals of less regulations and lower taxes. These are hallmarks of small town conservatives across the country. And so they really kind of had a heyday where they made great strides in kind of reshaping the town and their image. The lack of zoning regulations there allowed them to live in some very non-traditional living situations. They're living in yurts and trailers, and kind of like these armed encampments were springing up in the woods. And then right around 2016 is about when I start to wrap up the book.
Okay.
That is when the project started to kind of really fizzle out because of kind of like landscape changes within the broader libertarian movement. And just as it was dying out was about when I started popping around town asking about bears.
And the bears came and then you came.
Yeah, right.
So in the book, you set up the, you kind of scene set for Grafton, you talk about the Freetown Project, and then it kind of culminates, in chapter 12, I think, of the first section, you kind of start to explain how this all fed into creating this bear problem in Grafton. Could you talk a little bit, like, why do they have such a bear problem compared to other parts of the Northeast and other parts of New Hampshire? How did this sort of libertarian idealism give way to bears?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was that for reasons unrelated to libertarianism, the number of bears in the state was on a fairly dramatic upswing because of like state management policies and their efforts to kind of grow a population of bears that everyone could appreciate and enjoy. But the problem in Grafton was that because there was such a culture of not following state regulations and guidelines, and kind of like a real attachment to the idea that I can live how I want and do what I want and make my own decisions. I'm a grown-ass man. That was probably like their default position for a lot of discussions. And so they were not necessarily managing their garbage and food sources in uniform ways that kind of come with more traditional houses. So, if you're living in the woods, perhaps you're keeping your food in a Tupperware container rather than in a refrigerator. And so there were a lot of food sources that were available to the bears unintentionally. And then in addition to that, yes, and intentionally, right. That was kind of the other piece of it was they didn't necessarily look to the state to tell them whether or not they could feed bears. And so some folks were feeding the bears just for the pleasure and joy of watching them eat, which is certainly an understandable.
I would do that, yeah, of course.
Right, yeah.
You have this
others,
and
others, they wanted to manage the bears, by shooting them or kind of like, living out that homestead, fantasy or that idea that they're kind of like back in frontier times. And so the result was that the bears were very confused. They were getting very mixed signals about whether humans were, food sources or sources of danger or a little bit of both. And that drove a lot of the unusual bear activity in the community.
And so you have this one character named Donut Lady, which I love that name, and she's kind of the main perpetrator of the feeding of the bears. Were there other people doing that as well besides her who were kind of, leaving some scraps out for them intentionally?
There were. I talked to a couple of folks. Few of them were as open with me about it as Donut Lady, and I don't think any of them had kind of really established the following and the popularity among the bear world as Donut Lady. There's a description in the book of how she is very religiously and devotedly kind of going out there with 2 buckets of grain topped by donuts twice a day over a period of years and years. And the bears developed a relationship with her that I think would be exciting to a lot of people.
Do you think that the state, were they aware of her and her activities, or did they just want to stay out of it entirely, or that she just wasn't even on their radar at that level?
Well, I also in the book fault the state a bit for its bear management policies because, the state's approach was basically public education campaign is their primary way to get people to do that, and enforcement actions, they don't really have the resources for that. And so if you're doing public education campaigns that tell you, hey, manage your bird feeders and your garbage in a way that won't attract bears, then when somebody does attract bears, you can say, well, we had the public education campaign. But in fact, in our country and in Grafton in particular, there are large numbers of people. There's a very vocal, sizable minority of people who are not on the same page as the government with respect to a lot of advocated behavior, in this case, bear management. And so you know, the disconnect between those two groups is really, you know, quite dangerous.
And as you show, I mean, so all this kind of comes to a head with an attack on a woman named Tracy in 2012. Could you talk, I guess, tell that story, because everyone seems to absolutely love bear attack stories. So the stage.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tracy was a very sympathetic woman who, you know, kind of like lived her own life, minded her own business, administrative assistant for the town for a while. And she had a husky named Kai that she just absolutely loved. And so she got a new job at a greenhouse, and she splurged by buying Kai some roast beef. And one night she was kind of like slicing up some cold roast beef on her counter, and she opened the door to let Kai out for like a late night pee. And as she said, you know, in her words, my porch was just full of bear. And there were three bears, a mother with two large young on her porch. And Kai, you know, the two cubs bail immediately, but the mother bear starts fighting furiously with the dog. And Tracy, who has heard that, you know, you should scare a threatening bear off, right? A black bear, many experts would say, look big, scream at it, shout at it. And so Tracy stood on her porch and started shouting at the bear. But, you know, for reasons that aren't entirely clear, perhaps the dog had just kind of like pinned the bear down where it felt a little trapped, or perhaps because of its previous experiences with human and food sources, it charged Tracy and injured her quite badly with its claws. And the problem was, you know, the dog eventually drove the bear off for long enough for Tracy to get inside of her house. But then her problem became that she was bleeding very, very badly and losing blood. But she didn't have a landline, and her cell phone didn't work at home because Grafton, like a lot of rural kind of wilder areas, just doesn't have consistent cell coverage. And she didn't own a gun. And so she had to figure out how to get out of her house and go access help, knowing that those bears might still be directly outside her house. And she shows some real grit in solving that problem.
We'll have to buy the book.
That's right. That's right.
Tracy,
I'll tell 80% of any story you want.
I think one of the lines that you had in the book somewhere was that people in Grafton, you know, in some cases hated bears just as much as they hated taxes, which I.
Right.
So I'm curious, did you have any memorable bear encounters of your own in Grafton?
Not in Grafton. I have had several. Yeah, anytime anyone encounters a bear, I think they remember it. And so I've been, you know, fortunate enough to have maybe 5 or 6 encounters with bears over the years. Okay. The first time was after I had just moved to rural Maine from Chicago, and I was going for kind of a walk in the woods, and I slipped and fell down and found that I had slipped in some bear shit. And I got really worried about the possibility that this might indicate that there's a bear like right around. And I hadn't had any personal experience with bears outside of zoos, right? And that possibility really worried me. And so then, like, when I got home, I asked my older brother, who's an experienced outdoorsman, and he said, well, on the one hand, the odds of a bear attack are very, very slight. But on the other hand, if you've just slipped in bear shit in the woods, the odds have to be better. I don't know what they are, but they're better.
You're kind of so you did establish that bears do shit in the woods, though.
I can confirm. Yes.
So I guess on the flip side of that, have you had any particularly memorable libertarian encounters that did not make the book cut?
I think the most memorable ones have made the book, but I would like to say, like, the libertarians that I met in the town kind of ran the gamut between, extremist and reasonable, between, nice and nasty. And many of the libertarians and libertarian leaning folks in the town were very open and welcoming to me, and were kind enough to tell me their stories about how they see the world. And I think that hopefully helped me to kind of round out their characters a little bit, even though I'm poking fun in many cases. But there were definitely a lot of cases where I was treated, as an outsider is often treated in those types of situations, and felt kind of fortunate to walk away from some situations before they turned nasty.
Right. Something that I had mentioned to you that I was kind of wondering as I was reading through this book is, and you said that you were there around 2016. What did they think of Trump when he was running? What was the libertarian stance on Donald Trump?
To the extent that it came up, and that wasn't my main focus, but at that point, Trump was not really like a known quantity. I think one of the things that I remember thinking about him was, he's not like a traditional Republican, and he's saying some things that are like wildly out of whack with the libertarian or the Republican agenda and party. And so I think they like certain things about him. They like they felt like he was not going to be a war hawk, and that's something that they support very strongly. They liked his stance of pushing for a smaller government. He's kind of assaulted the EPA and a lot of federal agencies, and I think they applaud that. But the ones that I spoke to also kind of recognized that he was not an ideologically driven person, I guess you would say. I think a lot of libertarians are very much ideologues. They have like a very firm set of principles that are rooted in these ideas of individual freedom and individual rights and liberty. And so I think probably their biggest issue with Trump was that he just didn't really seem to understand their ideals. He just kind of coincidentally overlapped with some of their goals.
Were you personally swayed by any elements of libertarianism to move over to that side?
I was pleasantly surprised. I'd always thought, before I started researching the book, I'd always thought of libertarianism as kind of like a more extreme form of conservative republicanism. Mm-hmm. And I was pleasantly surprised to find that they do have certain positions that I agree with. Part of supporting individual rights is supporting, the rights of gay people to marry, for example. They were early on board with gay marriage, which seems unbelievable right now, but 10 years ago that was not cut and dry. They do have certain positions that I agree with, but the basic idea that the free market will solve problems like bear management, like climate change, so some of the issues that I care most deeply about, just makes it something that I could never get behind.
I'm curious, have you ever heard of the town of Heyday, Alaska?
No, what's going on in Heyday, Alaska?
I feel like this is like a sequel idea for you. It's just coming to me now. So there's this little town that basically is like completely landlocked by the rest of the US, but it connects to the British Columbia border in Canada. And it's also like this very tiny little libertarian town, but they have grizzly bears. And they basically depend on Canada for their social services. So they're constantly crossing the border. There's only one land border exit in and out, and it goes right into Canada. So their kids go to school in Canada. They rely on the Canadian postal system, but they all are very libertarian in their mindset, and they're contending with brown bears. So I feel like if you need to, ride the coattails of this a bit further,
Stay tuned. That sounds really fascinating, and I'd love to look into that.
So I'm curious, this was a few years ago that you were doing some of this reporting, but I mean, what do you think that Grafton should do about their bear problem? Like what kind of future do you personally see for the town?
The bear problems were one issue. Grafton's maybe larger problem was the other impact that the libertarian movement had on their town. There was a real reduction in social services, and the town didn't offer a lot of social services in the first place. So when there's a reduction, that means that like the one full-time member of your police force can't go out on patrols because he can't get his cruiser repaired. Real, cutting to the bone is not the word. And so as a result, they saw a lot of problems. They had their first, they'd never had a murder in living memory, and now they've got a double homicide that occurred during this time period. They had a road rage incident where one guy shot another guy on the roadside. Their recycling rates went down. Their number of sex offender registrations and neighbor complaints went up. So there were all sorts of negative effects that came about as this kind of like overall push. For bears specifically, I don't think it's a great mystery. I think that somehow the town and the state have to bridge the communication gap with those folks in town who feel like they can shoot at and or feed the bears. And whether they'll be able to achieve that, I don't know, but that's what needs to be done.
It's so interesting too, because black bears travel quite a bit, and they're known to teach kind of other bears what they figure out. So even if Grafton is having this problem, those bears could be teaching their friends that go elsewhere in New Hampshire to do some of those same behaviors as well. It's kind of, it's not just what stays in Grafton. Grafton,
right? Yeah. Interestingly, the attack on Tracy Colburn was the first bear attack. Got to qualify it. The first attack on a person by a wild bear in 100 or 150 years for a very, very long time. But since then, there have been 2 other attacks, both of which have happened within 20 miles or so of Grafton, which, as you know, as a bear expert, is well within the traveling capacity of a bear. And so, this is a problem that will continue.
Do you know what's happening, as of 2020 with bears around the Grafton area, how the population is, if things have changed substantially since when you were reporting this?
I'm not quite sure. As the book explains, when there's a drought year or some sort of strain on their natural resources, that leads to more desperate bears. But as far as there were some wild swings in bear populations, as the book explains, because humans got really sick of the bears and tried to kill all of them. I think they have a fairly stable population right now, and I think the most egregious behavior has been largely addressed. So we can hope that they're on their way to bear stability.
Right. And American Black bear is one of the bear species that are actually growing around the world and doing okay by and large compared to the plight of the polar bear or the panda bear. American black bears have it pretty good. So one other thing that I was kind of wondering about is, do you conceptualize this book as a bear book with a libertarian angle, or a libertarian book with a bear angle?
That's a good question. My publisher loves to say that has been split exactly down the middle. And as much as you can say it's a libertarian, a book about libertarians with bears in it, you can say the reverse. I think ultimately it is more about humans than about bears. There's a branch of study called Anthro Zoology. The idea that a community and a culture evolve kind of like in conjunction with the animals and plants that that community evolves in, you know, that those things are very interwoven, and that we tend to have this kind of like human-centric idea that people just kind of like evolve, whereas in fact, the way that people evolve is very much dependent on the other species that are evolving at the same time. And so I think in Grafton, you know, when we look at the bears, we're really looking at an expression of human behavior. And so for that reason, I would say it's probably more about people.
Right. I think it was interesting too. There was a scene where you talk about one of the bears kind of learning to dodge the light. It could understand like how to move between these farms and between these homesteads. You know, that it was traveling in shadow, and that, you know, humans perhaps have basically taught it that as well. I'm just going to put out a quick call for anyone who wants to ask questions to type them into the Q&A box. And then I'll just ask, for the people who want to buy your book and read your book, what's something that you hope they take away from it, or what's a lesson learned about kind of that dynamic between people and bears that you hope people get from this?
I mean, I think, you know, partially just because of my writing style, you know, I don't feel like the book is very prescriptive. You know, I don't want people to, yeah, I don't think that there's like a single takeaway that I want them to have other than a pleasurable and entertaining reading experience. Yeah, I worked really hard to have a lot of exciting scenes unfold kind of like in their pace, and I hope that people will read it and just kind of enjoy those scenes. But I also feel like the situation is complex enough that people will be able to read it and maybe learn things about libertarians and or bears that will, you know, intrigue them and make them want to dig a little bit deeper. And I hope no one walks away thinking that, you know, bears are evil, scary killing machines, or that libertarians are.
Exactly. I think that this was a perfect book for 2020. I feel like I learned a lot about libertarians. My bear knowledge was also already a little high. But libertarian was a whole new front for me, and very, very funny along the way. Segue to that, so you have a song competition that you have been working on. A musician walks into a bear for the past weeks. Do you want me to pass that over to you now?
Yes. Yeah, so yes, some folks know this. For the last month or so, I've been coordinating this song contest where young musical artists from all over the world have been putting together songs that are inspired in some way, shape, or form by the book. And they have come up with a bunch of amazing entries. So I just want to take a moment. We're going to announce the winner in just a moment, but I'd like to thank them in turn. First, I just want to thank the judges. I was joined on the judges panel by Chicago-based drummer and composer Glenn Kochi of the Grammy Award-winning band Wilco, and Gabe McDonough, one of the most experienced music and branding professionals in the world. So this contest was judged by these two titans of the music industry and me. And my strongest musical credit is that I can recite the lyrics to 6 different Weird Al Yankovic albums. So the three of us pulled our musical talent together to judge a competition. We had 7 semi-finalists from the Grafton hometown region. We had Jake Sarikis, who typically flexes his guitar and singing skills by leading some worship sessions at his local church, and Take Out for Two, a very fun and funny band made up of 2 adorable people who, while coming up with their entry, married each other. From across the pond, we had entries from 2 talented guitar soloists, Nia Seth of Nottingham, England, and pop rocker Sean Legaspi of Dublin, Ireland. In the Midwest, we had a happy-go-lucky entry from Cosmic Sleepovers of Iowa City, Iowa, and an experimental alternative electronic submission from Gutter Punk of Fishers, Indiana. And of course, the country western track came out of the American Southwest, in this case from veteran Isaiah Gonzalez of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And to those semifinalists, I want to say you've all walked into a bear, done wonderful work, and I thank you. So that leaves our 3 finalists. In third place, who we're calling the second runner-up, was the Chicagoland's Boys in the Basement, headed by the disc golf chucking Johnny Bermuda. After he heard their entry, which was called Yeah Yeah, Judge Gabe McDonough said he loved the laid-back vibe and gave huge bonus points for featuring hockey fights in the video and the entire Bittner's Snack Food Orchestra. Our second place finisher and our first runner-up was Heather Johnson. And she reached out to me about 5 days before the submissions were due, said she might not be able to get her entry to me. I said, yeah, what the hell could Heather have going on that's more important than this? And she said, well, there's a wildfire ripping through our town. So I said, okay, well, you know, tend to that. But she still kind of soldiered through and came up with a creative recording called Liberty and Happiness that got her second place, which gets her the prize of the words that I just said. The judge, Glenn, praised her beautiful voice, which he said she uses like an instrument with lots of timbres and color, utilized tastefully. If the folks who are tuned in right now, if you're listening to this, you've probably already committed to dropping some money on my book. And when you registered, you maybe also threw a few bucks to support Gibson's, our independent bookstore. So you're probably thinking, what else can I spend money on for Matt? And I'm glad you asked, people. The Rogue Credit Union is matching $100,000 in donations to help address the impacts of the fires in Heathers Valley in the Almeida and Aubenchain region. She tells me that they have close to 50 people unaccounted for and 4 confirmed deaths, over 300 homes burned down, and many businesses as well. So if you would like to help her address the impacts in her community, donations go to the Southern Oregon branch of the Red Cross, and you can access that by going to www.roguecu.org/community/donate. And that brings us to our winning entry. Let's hear from legendary Glenn Kochi.
Myself and Gabe McDonough, we just want to thank everyone for participating in this song contest. We had a lot of great, really interesting entries, and just really appreciate you all sharing your creativity with us. So without further ado, the winner is A Libertarian Walks Into a Bear, the song by Tall Carl. Congratulations.
Tall Carl is a very unusual entrant into the contest. He came up with a rap, which was the only rap song in the contest. And it's especially exciting and impressive that he came up with this because he is a sock puppet. We'd like to play an introductory video from Tall Carl. Elizabeth, if you could roll that clip, please.
Okay.
Making it in the rap game is hard in 2020. Times are crazy, man. It's hard to cut through all the noise. My name's Tall Carl. I'm a rapper. I'm from Harmon, Missouri. A lot of my lyrical subject matter comes from the darkest places in my life. I've dealt with a lot of trauma, you know, and that's the only way I've been able to talk about it. When I was really young, I lost my twin brother in a load of laundry, and it tore my whole family apart. I was in a downward spiral for years until I met Short Greg. He's my promoter and my manager now. Turned my whole life around. Music is everything to me. I try to write every day. If I had to compare myself to another artist, it would probably be a combination of Jay Dilla, Sade, and I think definitely Igor Stravinsky. I think the musician walked into a bear competition is going to be an exciting challenge. Once I started reading the book, I couldn't put it down, giving me a lot to draw on. There are a lot of talented musicians involved, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they come up with.
All right. Congratulations to Tall Carl. We will be playing Tall Carl's winning entry at the end of the program. So you can see his rap. Very good.
So at this point now, we do have some questions for the audience. We have had some in the chat while you two were discussing this book, and we've had some in our Q&A. Congrats, Tall Carl. So we have had some questions here. Lisa asks, have you had any backlash from any Graftonites or anticipate any now that the book has come out? Did you offer any the chance to see the book in advance?
I did not offer any a chance to see the book in advance, although I did reach out to several of the people who were featured most prominently and kind of let them know that the book was coming, and in brief kind of described or summed up what content within the book, what was kind of like specific to them. And that led to some conversations. Most of the feedback that I've gotten has been from folks who, are curious about the book, but who haven't actually read it yet. So, I think a lot of folks in Grafton are probably reading it for the first time this week, and I'll see what sort of feedback I get from them. I've tried to be to have those open lines of communication with them, and I look forward to whatever sort of conversation they want to have.
Tom wants to know, did you get any comments from residents you named questioning your description of the town personalities?
Could you read that again? I'm not sure that I'm fully following.
Did you get any, let me find it again. Did you get any comments from residents that you named in the book? Did you get any comments on them questioning your description of the town's personalities?
I would say not really yet. I did have one comment from, or I got a little feedback from Donut Lady, who did not like a physical descriptor that I used in the Atavist magazine piece. So I did not continue that. I heard some, again, just kind of like concern about how am I going to be portrayed, that sort of thing. But as far as I know, those folks who were asking those sorts of questions had not yet read the book, and so not yet.
Not yet. So Grace wants to know, could you read your second favorite passage?
Oh my goodness. Well, I guess I do have the book here, but I don't know that I could access my second favorite passage without without previous advance notice. So perhaps at a later time.
All right. In that case, Jennifer wants to know, what was your favorite part to write?
I think my favorite part to write, which actually now that I think about it, might be kind of my second favorite passage, to go back to Grace's question, is a scene that unfolds where a woman named Diane Burrington is woken up in the middle of the night by sounds of her sheep in distress. She kind of goes charging out into the night, grabbing a gun in each hand, and she's just kind of very badassy, like a Western pioneer woman type vibe. And she goes out and there's a bear threatening her sheep, and she gets kind of sidetracked trying to save a sheep, like a panicked sheep, from getting strangled in a barbed wire fence. And while she does that, the bear decides to run away, but Diane also has in with her sheep a guard llama, which is actually not all that unusual, a role for llamas to play. And so this llama goes chasing off after this bear in the night, and Diane is terrified that her llama is going to come to serious harm. And so she's like, once she frees the sheep, she's chasing after the llama, which is chasing after the bear. And Diane realizes that the bear is going to come up short when it hits the fence at the far end of the pasture. And then it's going to have no choice but to defend itself, which of course it does. And the bear kind of like, bounces off the electric fence and then turns and just launches itself at Hurricane, which is the name of the llama. And the llama then proceeds to just kick the shit out of the bear.
My favorite part to read, I will just say. I knew you were going to read that.
Llamas are fierce.
Yeah. I was so delighted to write that, because it just unfolded so wonderfully, and it just confounded my expectations so much when the llama starts kicking.
I do believe Matt is quite frozen right now. So what we had planned to end the event with is we are going to share the last musical, the musical winning entry. And we are excited to do that. This is the winning entry for Tall Carl. I will say that this event, we have the books available at Gibson's Bookstore. We offer curbside pickup, we ship, and we are available for browsing. So without further ado, I am happy to share this evening the winning entry for this musical concert, A Libertarian Walks Into a Bear, a Song. Have a great night, everybody.
Citizens fight to become the masters of their fate. Could this be the answer? Or will it be more of the same? Laws written to represent the ones who legislate.
People from all around, young and old, moving in, fitting to, take control. Liberty, live free or die, that's the goal. But they should have known. Out there in the woods, there were bears making plans of their own. Intelligent killing machines, 500 pounds. Fit your whole head inside their mouth. Eating stray cats like Al Fair, taking over the town. Story time. Diane Barrington was alone in her home, sleeping tight, middle of the night. Little did she know she was about to have to fight for her life. Oh no, here comes one. Diane, get your gun. Black bear out front, moving like a thief on your front lawn. Sniffing out livestock, smells blood. Think he found what he wants. Got the sheep on the run, but he doesn't know whose house he's creeping on. It's Barrington coming out the front door, packing cannons in each hand like Megatron. That's when things got tense. Diane went on the offense, rifle ready to dispense. About to teach a bear how to clean a fence, but what happened next made no damn sense. It all played out like an action drama. The king of the new England fauna never could have figured out a prima donna llama jumping on him, throwing hooves like hola, como se llama. Johnny said, don't tax my faith. Tim said, I'm a count, set it all straight. Craig said, make me the head of the state. Adam said, it'll fall apart any day. Mine said, freedom is depending on don't worry about yourself. Gotta win the pot with the hand you dealt. All that matters is what you want. Roosevelt said, what about everyone else? The ones who the system doesn't work for. The weak and the poor. If you give a little bit, you get back even more. Standing on the precipice of another great depression. People out of work, poverty, dispossession, social isolation, hitting aggression. It's time that we all address the question.
Do we owe to each other?